Hey guys, it's me again, Tantacles. I'm here with another tier list, this time the Final Fantasy IV Casual Character Tier List. Final Fantasy IV was released as Final Fantasy II in the United States, and it's one of my favorite games. The plot slaps, it is a tearjerker at times, and the characters are fantastic. This tier list, just based on the fact that I'm tiering the characters based on their forms, is going to have some spoilers in it, so you've been warned. Just to be clear, you don't get to choose your characters in this game, you generally just sort of have to play with whoever's available. But there are some characters where if they die, you might as well reset your game, and there are some that might as well not even be in the party, they're that useless. You might as well just continue on and beat the enemies you're fighting against with the characters you have left. The first character is Dark Knight Cecil, and he's going to go into the A tier. Now, he's probably going to end up being in the bottom of the A tier. The reason is that his darkness tech, while it hits everything for big damage, it doesn't hit undead foes for a lot of damage, and there are a lot of undead foes, particularly on the mountain where he gets, well, I don't want to give away the spoiler, but on the mountain, let's go with that. And those are some of the hardest fights in the game. It's a little bit rough. That being said, he does have great damage. The problem is just those fights with undead monsters. The next character is Cecil as a paladin. Paladin Cecil goes in the S tier. He has a ton of utility in battle with his physical attacks, and he also has a lot of utility mostly outside of battle, but some in battle with his healing abilities. I found that I would generally use other characters to heal in battle or items to heal in battle because he just can't heal enough at one time to be that useful. It's better to just use him to do damage and let other characters take the healer role. Next up is Cid, and Cid is going to go into the B tier. His Analyze ability is a little bit useful, but not that useful, and you're usually better off just attacking with him. He has good damage, not great damage, and doesn't have much to offer beyond that, so he is in the B tier. Next up is Edge, and Edge is in the S tier. Now, his survivability isn't amazing. However, once you get him up to higher levels, which you probably will as you go through the moon area, he becomes a little bit more tanky, but most importantly, he offers a lot of variety to the party. He has great physical stats, he can throw things to do a ton of damage, and he can use some magic, although his magic becomes a lot less powerful later in the game when you have other magical powerhouses. Overall, a fantastic character, and even though that's not what this tier list is about, I love his design. Next is Edward, and if I had an F tier, I would put him there, but instead I'm going to put him into the D tier. Now, granted, he has a lot of utility when he plays his harp and helps you fight in the metal cave. However, he's not in combat at that point, so I'm not going to count that part of the game. He does poor damage and becomes almost useless when he reaches low HP because he literally just hides. He goes out of the battle and you can't use him until he comes back. I hate it. D tier. Next up is Fusoya, who's going to go into the A tier. He has all of the best magic in the game, but you need magic points to use them. His magic points are capped at 190, which really limits his usefulness and makes you need to use ethers in longer battles, which just slows down your progress and allows enemies to get hits in. And later in the game, when you have access to Fusoya, the enemies can get really strong and you just want to hit them fast. So he's a great character, lots of utility, but just has that little bit that stops him from being the S tier. Next is Kane, and before I get hate mail, I am a Kane stan, but Kane for me goes into the B tier, the top of the B tier. The reason for that is just his lack of variety. He can jump and he can attack, and that's just about it. You don't have that much control over when his jump comes down, although it's timed, so if you're really going to get into that, you can figure it out. But the fact is, if you had control over his jump ability and when he comes down, it would be a lot more useful because he could evade attacks more readily. But usually what ends up happening in a casual playthrough when people use Kane is they have him jump and then he comes back down and then he gets wiped by a skill. Alternatively, he doesn't get wiped by the skill and he's the only one alive and he's a lot of trouble reviving all of your party members because he doesn't have strong magic. Well, he doesn't have any magic, so he can't really revive anyone with anything except items. So stan Kane, but not the best character in this game. Next up is Palum, who is a black mage. He's the twin black mage with Purim, and for the point that he comes into the game, he is A tier. Now, that might be a controversial placement, but hear me out. At the point where Palum is in the game, Cecil has a lot of trouble doing damage to anything because, as I mentioned before, a lot of the enemies are undead. So when you get Palum, his magic is invaluable. When he casts fire, things just die. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't have the greatest magic point pool, which stops him in his tracks and makes you have to use a lot of ethers. If that weren't the case, he would probably be in the S tier for the point that he is in the game. He and Purim also have the twin ability, which allows them to pool their MP and cast bigger spells. However, it takes so long to use that you might as well not even bother. And more importantly, they don't have a huge MP pool, so you're going to deplete all of your magic points casting that one big spell and then not have any for later battles. Purim is also in the A tier, just below her brother. She's the white mage twin, and her magic is very useful at that point in the game. You need a healer. Cecil can't heal yet. If he could heal at that point, then she would be much less useful, but he can't, so she goes into the A tier. Next up is Rosa, who's going into the top of the A tier above Fusoya. Her strengths are that she has all of the best white magic in the game, and she has a great MP pool. However, she has trouble putting out damage until the end of the game when she gets holy. She's the main user of bows in the party, but unfortunately her strength stat is not enough to help her do damage with them. So you might as well just have her pre-casting cure spells so that she can keep your party healthy before the enemies can kill you. Next up is young Rydia, and I'm going to put her at the bottom of A tier. Now, she's very useful, but the problem is that she splits her strengths between black and white magic. As a generalist, she has trouble contributing damage, although she does a good job of it, and her summons just aren't that special at this point in the game. She's useful, but you might as well just use her for your curing abilities and just have Cecil go to town on everything. Next up is black mage Rydia, and she is at the very tippy top of A tier. She's almost an S tier. Her strengths are that she does great damage, it's party-wide, but also does pretty good single target damage with her summons. She eventually, later in the game, learns Meteor, the most powerful spell, and she absolutely saves you in the battle against Golbez, which I really appreciate. That was fun. However, her biggest problem is her frailty. She gets one-shot by so many attacks that it is really annoying to keep her alive. That's not to say she isn't useful and you can buff her to help her take less damage. It's just really difficult to buff her enough that she doesn't get killed very quickly. However, the reason she scores so much higher than her young counterpart is that she's not a generalist. She does one thing really well and she sticks to that. Next up is Tella, and Tella goes into the A tier just above Cecil. He's available very briefly, but for the period that you have him, he is so useful. Actually, I'm gonna move him up. I actually think at the period that you get him in the game, he is extremely useful, on par with Rosa. He has a ton of great healing spells with a good magic stat. The thing that keeps him out of S tier is his magic point pool and his frailty. That being said, he's always in the back row, he's always using magic, and he does great damage with his spells and great healing. He's basically a better version of young Rydia without summoning. And the final character is Yang, and he's gonna go into the B tier. Which means that I don't really need a C tier, but I'm keeping this C tier because Edward is that bad that he deserves to be 2 tiers below everybody else. And actually, Yang is going to go right above Sid. Yang does good damage, he has good AoE with his kick ability, although it doesn't do enough for it to be amazing. His problem, like Kane, is a lack of variety. Cecil offers healing, Edge offers some magic as well as the throw ability, Rydia offers black magic and does it extremely well, Rosa offers healing and does it extremely well, Yang does physical damage, and he does it in a mediocre way, so he ends up in the B tier for usefulness. And that's the tier list. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment if you disagree with my placements. Now the only question I have for you is, which one are you going to watch next? How about The Legend of Dragoon? Or Chrono Trigger? It's up to you to decide. Bye bye!